In today's scriptures, we find a range of faith. We have the devout psalmist who knows God intimately in his life, who feels hemmed in by God all around him. He knows and is sure that God knew him when he was being formed in his mother's womb, that God knows his inmost thoughts even before he speaks. Then we have Paul and his fellow Christians who are persecuted, whose lives are oppressed, and yet they show forth light in this darkness through their steadfast faith in God. We have Eli, a faithful servant of God, but whose powers are diminished, not only his vision, but it would seem his influence. He cannot control his sons and prevent their blasphemies, and it seems his influence in the community may have diminished. For we read, the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. When we meet Samuel, he is an innocent young boy, obedient but not yet knowing God. But through his obedience, he comes in faith to know God better and to become a great prophet. Then in the gospel passage, we have the Pharisees, whose strictness about adhering to the law is legendary. Yet they are blind to the fact that Jesus is God's chosen Messiah. And not only do they not hear his message, they plot to destroy him. Recently, I read Diana Butler Bass's book, Grateful, The Transformative Power of Giving Thanks. In it, she encourages developing the habit of giving thanks. This may start with keeping a gratitude diary or journal, writing down the things in the day for which we are thankful. One needn't write things down, but it may be an aid to forming a habit. You can awake first thing in the day and give thanks. You can give thanks through the day as events happen, and at the end of the day, you can review the day's events and give thanks. The important thing is to work at making it habitual. She also makes the point that just as gratitude can be a habit, so can ingratitude. We all know people who moan and lament what's gone wrong in their lives. I think of my mother, who is one who looked for the good in people around her and in the world. She was definitely a person who expressed gratitude often and gave thanks. On the other hand, her younger sister was one who always looked on what had gone wrong. It wasn't that she couldn't give thanks, and she did sometimes give thanks. She once said to me, I always remember the bad things that have happened. She could hold on to a grudge longer than anybody I knew. She was in some ways a bitter, unhappy person. And even when life was going well, there was always an undercurrent. I think in her mind, a sense of, this is fine, but what's going to go wrong? Deborah Butler Bass talks about the benefits of gratitude, of being thankful. Studies and research seem to show that persons who are thankful, who show gratitude, live healthier lives. They may avoid depression. They may experience sudden injury, illness, or trauma and shocks, which they survive better than persons who are not thankful. They may even sleep better. I'm working on this one, the end of my day, trying to give thanks. Some nights it works. Well, these are mental and physical benefits, but what about the spiritual benefits of being thankful? It seems that we may sometimes wonder where we're going in life. Things that we plan don't always work out. When I was young, as a child, I was always blind in one eye and nearsighted in the other. And in my 20s, this got worse, and I began using a white cane. I floundered a bit, but eventually I met visually impaired students at the London School of Therapy. It was a school to train physiotherapists who were visually impaired, blind or partially sighted. And so I decided to go to England. I entered the school. At this point, I could still read print, but I was beginning to use recorded textbooks and working on my Braille. My term work was poor as I worked at building notes on anatomy in Braille. I passed the Christmas exams, but the faculty told me to go away for a year and work on my Braille. At that point, I already had 2 university degrees, and this to me felt like my first academic failure. I was crushed. I refused to return home a failure. I stayed in London. That winter, I lived in a cheap and not very cheerful hotel. That January, London experienced 3 weeks of snow, which was pretty unusual. Life felt bleak in all sorts of ways. But eventually, I moved to a hostel for the working blind. I formed new friends, made new community. I got temporary employment and later trained as a typist and got work. I had a friend there who attended the local parish church, and one Sunday I decided to go with him. I found that I kept returning to the church Sunday by Sunday. My community expanded, I formed new friendships, and most importantly, my spiritual life was enriched and deepened. I discovered the comfort of prayer, of worship, of communal gathering in the Spirit. Of course, ultimately, years later, this led to my call to ordination and my becoming an Anglican priest. All of this I could never have imagined, even me being in a church, let alone clergy. All this is to say that sometimes things we plan don't work out, may seem like failures, but in hindsight, we can see that they open new doors, led us in directions we would never have dreamed. As John Lennon said, life is what happens while you're making plans. So, how do we deal with this issue of thankfulness? We live in a time where there's so much dismal news. The wars in the Ukraine and Gaza, political unrest, natural catastrophes. Politicians no longer seem able to stand on certain platforms. They are swayed by political spin and what the public demands. It seems more than ever, society around the world is polarized. Extremist individuals and groups have public voice through social media and public events. There is a lot of fear and a lot of darkness. And so where is the thankfulness? We have to start somewhere. How can I be thankful? I think of loving parents who encouraged and supported me, who gave me access to piano and singing lessons, Cubs and Scouts, supported me in higher education. Wherever life took me and however bleak it was, I was sure and certain in knowing that they loved and supported me. I'm grateful when I think of my grade 5 teacher, who was near at hand when I chose books from our small school library. I think of my piano teacher, a wonderful elderly English woman, Miss Kathleen Elvidge, who taught me singing and piano and was endlessly patient. My mother told the story of one occasion, apparently, when Miss Elvidge was instructing me in piano technique. I looked at her and said, "Do you know I have a guinea pig at home?" Poor lady. I can remember her often saying, "Donald, your head is like a cabbage and your mind is like a sieve." But she persevered and she gave me a rich foundation which has given me great satisfaction through my life. I'm grateful for kind family friends who were honorary aunts and uncles. I'm grateful for a childhood friend who is still a friend. Over the last 2 years, as I've received immunotherapy for cancers, she has been with me for these sessions, and she has cheered with me now that that therapy appears to be quite successful. Being thankful. We don't know always where life will take us, but we can be thankful. As Diana Butler Bass has written, we need to form the habit of being thankful. Gratitude. How can you start? Don't be put off by the thought of obstacles or things that may hinder you or discourage you. Start small. Whether you keep a gratitude journal, whether you just reflect on how your day is going. Each of us can find moments, and sometimes as our plans go awry, it may feel like we are wrong or our plans are wrong, and yet with the hindsight of later years, we can realize that things have led us in directions we would not have expected, and for that, we can give great thanks. How can you be thankful today? Where will you look to find thankfulness? May you have the faith and encouragement of the psalmist. May you have the courage and perseverance of Paul and his early Christian friends. May you know the blessing of thankfulness in a God whose love abides and cares for each of us. Thanks be to God for this faithfulness.